So today we're going to look at the track that I submitted for the All Ambient Discord remix competition.
In first place is Mr.
We didn't know.
Is Mr. Andrew Schaefer. Go outside.
No way! For real?
The original track was created by Sova, which is a collaborative project between Kirk Smith of We Dream of Eden, Mike Graff of Dear Gravity, Marshall Usinger of Be Still the Earth, and Ben Tatlow of Antarctic Wastelands. Yeah, I like remixing because it's a fun way to kind of get a behind the scenes look at another artist's process, by seeing the stems and seeing, how many elements and what purpose each element serves in the mix and in the sort of arc of the song. I just always find it interesting and kind of a learning experience to be able to work with that. And another thing that's fun about remixes is, a lot of the heavy lifting of coming up with the initial ideas and sound palette and motifs is already there. So you can kind of hit the ground running creatively in terms of just, building on that foundation. I love doing remixes and I really enjoyed doing this one. So yeah, let's just dive in. So here's the project file. And you can see there's not a lot of layers here. There's not a lot going on. The original stems, which are in this little folder here, there's more stems in the original than there are in what I ended up doing. The way that I tend to approach remixes is I just try to find, a handful of elements in the track that inspire me or, stuff that I just really like, as opposed to just adding something on top of the whole track or just like throwing reverb on the whole thing. I like to just pick a few elements as kind of a foundation and then sort of reimagine out of that. So we have two tracks here that are basically, come from the stems pretty much unchanged. I rolled off a little bit of high end on the bass track here, but we have a bass and a pad that, if we listen to them together, really lovely combination of tones here. And this is really the progression of the song. So this is what carries it melodically forward. And like I said, these two basically come unchanged from the original track, outside of just having this pad layer come in a little bit later. And the whole track is, my remix is longer by that much, because I wanted to just give a little bit of an intro section here. So that's kind of the main driving melodic section. And this is our tapey, noisy, kind of random sounding layers here. This layer here, what I did was I took, I think it was from Piano Melody High. There was a little section of that I just really liked. And so I took that section and recorded it as a loop into the Zoia. My tape box patch that I made for Zoia has a looper built into it. And so what I did was recorded a loop and then dropped it an octave in pitch. And within that patch, there's stereo delay, there's distortion, there's pitch warble, there's the stereo sort of dropouts that you hear, and all that noise added. And so this creates a pretty full spectrum soundscape. It doesn't have a ton of bass, but it does have a lot of low mids and a lot of just this noise and kind of stereo interest here. And as far as processing on this, not a lot is going on. I have smooth operator here. Oh, you can hear that nice distortion. And this is just here to tame low mids a little bit. the reason I have gain plugins on either side of it is because this plugin does really well with higher gain signals. So I'm basically just doing some gain staging here. And then I have sort of shaping, corrective EQ, and then I have another EQ that's acting just as a low pass filter, which is automated throughout the track because it's so crispy in the beginning, which I really love. But then as the track goes on, it kind of cleans up and smooths out a little bit. But other than me kind of tweaking with the feedback on the delay and stuff, this loop is just playing throughout the whole track. But it's not timed with anything. It's on its own time scale, so it interacts, I think, really beautifully with these two layers as you have this yeah, I just think they work really well together. And then this layer here, mood tape loop. This is another, I basically did the same thing where I took one of the original stems, which was, I believe, mood loop original. This is the original stem. And this is what it sounds like, again, through Zoia. One of my other tape patches, the tape loop patch, which allows you to have actually 4 tape loops going. But in this case, I think I just have 2. There's a left and a right, so they're split stereo. And they're bouncing up and down from the normal octave to an octave up. And that bouncing is happening randomly. So, and with the noise and the dropouts and everything, again, it creates a lot of stereo interest. And these two together are very noisy. But this mood tape loop is a little bit more in the background, just to create kind of that wispy kind of interest and movement. And so those are kind of, we have the melodic area, we have sort of this noisy, tapey area, and then everything else is guitar. And all of this is running through that same tape box patch on the Zoia. So essentially everything that I added to this remix was just Zoia tape patches. So this layer is really simple. And actually, I don't remember exactly what the path was for this layer. It may not have been the tape box patch. It may have just been reverb on the Zoia and maybe even the Mercury 7. But I'm just playing with a volume pedal to create swells. And then we can look at this feedback layer here. So this is definitely tape box patch on the Zoia. So what that patch does is it takes your signal, makes it stereo, sends it through 2 delays, a left and a right, both with, in this case, relatively short delay times, but long feedback. But they're different, and they're not synced to anything. So in some ways, this just kind of sounds like a drone, but there's a lot of sort of back and forth bits in terms of sort of harmonic sounds and volume changes there. And then we have our main guitar layer here, which kind of adds some of the drama to this track. A little bit more processing on the bus here will take off that reverb. So the way I recorded these was essentially just, had either the whole track or a section of the track on loop, and then just, kind of noodled in or improved in some of these swells and kind of distorted bits, and did probably 4 or 5 takes, maybe more. I know there's 5 tracks here, but these have been chopped up. And so then just use those to then build a progression that feels nice to me. And so in this case, there's these are the 4 tracks here. So you can see a little bit of panning with them, a lot of automation. Oh, there's a fun... So this track is a good example of you can hear those short stereo delays, and that signal being fed into them is mono, straight down the middle, but having 2 different delay times on either side creates this really cool kind of stereo feeling. And so again, no reverbs on this in the original recording. It's all just stereo delay, distortion. Oh, that was a cool sound. And in terms of the bus processing here, we have this preamp plugin, which is like a tube saturation kind of thing. It just kind of thickens up the signal a little bit. I like to use this when I'm doing any kind of bus processing, because they talk about like different compression and saturation can kind of glue things together. This does that really well. It kind of tightens, but also accentuates the low mids, and it kind of tames the high end a little bit, but it just makes it sound more cohesive. We have, again, smooth operator, which to me is really important on bus processing with this kind of stuff, because you have all these different layers coming and going, and smooth operator, which is essentially a dynamic EQ. So it's another good one to just kind of keep everything from being too abrasive or from standing out too much. And then we have OTT on 20%, which really the reason I use this is, again, it does, it's a multi-band compressor technically, but it does a little bit of the same kind of thing Smooth Operator does. But in this case, it also has upward compression, so it helps bring out the high end. So that's often what I'm using that for, is when I want things to kind of sparkle a little bit more. It brings up some of those high frequencies. And then, of course, we have our EQ, which is also kind of thickening the low end and bringing out some of the high end. And our favorite Supermassive here, which I have the mix level automating a little bit throughout. But I was intentional when I was recording these original pieces. You know, they all have that stereo delay that almost has a reverb kind of vibe, but I didn't put any reverb on them because I knew I was going to have a bunch of layers that I would then bus process. And if I felt like I needed more reverb, which in this case I did, I would put it on the bus, because if all of these had their own reverb, that would just get way too muddy. And this is a pretty long reverb. If I stop playback, yeah, what you're hearing right now is just the reverb tail from this, which is lovely. You know, all of this was recorded in through pedals or played on guitar. And, you know, I've tried to kind of, you know, I take a lot of time with pedals and with my guitar to try to come up with a tone that I can record it in and feel pretty good about it as it stands without having to do a lot of corrective EQ or compression. And one, that just saves a lot of time. But two, it helps kind of build a mix without having to, you know, correct everything after the fact. Because we have these pretty distinct areas where you have bass, you have this sort of mid-pad layer, you have the high end of the noise, and the guitars fill this sort of mid-range interest that come and go, but they kind of float on top of this bass progression. And then you can hear at the end, yeah, things really clean up. And that's just automating filter and volume. And on the master bus, you know, I just have this gain plugin and a limiter on it just for the sake of bringing up the volume to make this video, but it's not actually hitting the limiter or anything. So, and this was mastered by Marshall Usinger of Be Still the Earth. So the version that was released was mastered and, you know, polished from what I'm showing you here. So yeah, that's the track. Again, I want to thank the guys over at All Ambient for picking this remix as one of the winners of the competition, and just for the opportunity to, you know, play with a track that they put together. It was really fun, and I really enjoy these kind of things. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.